When the people trusted to enforce the law begin judging strangers before they know who they are, the price of that mistake can become far greater than anyone imagines. It begins with a single decision made in a matter of seconds. And on one ordinary afternoon, at a quiet gas station beside Highway 27, one officer was about to make a choice that would change his career forever. The afternoon sun hung low over the highway, painting long golden reflections across the rows of fuel pumps. Families filled their tanks before weekend trips, truck drivers stretched their legs after hours behind the wheel, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the convenience store every time the front door opened. It was the kind of place where complete strangers crossed paths for only a few minutes before disappearing into different directions. Nothing about the scene suggested that it would soon become the center of a story the entire state would be talking about. A black SUV rolled slowly beside pump number 6 before coming to a smooth stop. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Ellison, the governor of the state, though no one watching would have recognized him immediately. Dressed in faded blue jeans, worn leather boots, and a plain navy jacket, he looked more like a businessman returning from a long drive than one of the state's highest elected officials. That was exactly how Marcus preferred to travel whenever his schedule allowed. Earlier that morning, he had spent hours visiting rural communities, speaking with local business owners, teachers, and families about roads that needed repairs, schools that needed funding, and neighborhoods that often felt forgotten. He believed leadership meant seeing the real world without flashing lights or cameras announcing his arrival. His security detail had recommended traveling with a visible escort, but Marcus had insisted on driving himself for part of the trip. Real conversations happened when people believed they were speaking to an ordinary citizen. As the gas nozzle clicked into place, Marcus glanced across the parking lot where a father helped his young daughter clean the windshield while an elderly couple laughed over a folded highway map. Moments like these reminded him why public service mattered in the first place. He smiled quietly, unaware that another vehicle had already entered the station. A white patrol cruiser rolled slowly between the pumps before stopping several yards away. Officer Ethan Brooks stepped out, adjusting his duty belt as he scanned the area with practiced confidence. His eyes moved from one customer to another until they settled on Marcus, standing beside the black SUV. Something about the scene immediately caught his attention, and within seconds he had already formed an opinion. Without hesitation, Ethan began walking across the concrete with calm but determined steps. Nearby conversations gradually faded as customers noticed the officer approaching. Marcus looked up with a relaxed expression, expecting perhaps a routine greeting or a simple question. Instead, Ethan stopped only a few feet away, his posture rigid and his voice carrying clearly across the station. "Sir, I need to see your identification." Marcus nodded politely, keeping both hands visible. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes moved from Marcus to the SUV and back again, as though the conclusion had already been reached before the conversation had even begun. Several customers exchanged uncertain glances while the cashier watched silently through the front window. Marcus reached carefully toward his wallet, but before he could remove it, Ethan raised one hand sharply. "Don't move too fast." The words settled over the gas station like an unexpected storm cloud. Every ordinary sound suddenly seemed quieter. The fuel pumps continued humming. Traffic flowed steadily along the highway, and yet every pair of eyes nearby had turned toward the encounter, unaware they were witnessing the opening moments of a mistake that would soon echo across the entire state. Marcus slowly removed his wallet exactly as instructed, making every movement deliberate enough that no reasonable person could mistake his intentions. He handed over his driver's license without a trace of irritation, believing that a calm conversation could resolve whatever concern had brought the officer to his side. Officer Ethan Brooks accepted the identification, glanced at the card for only a brief moment, then looked back at Marcus with an expression that revealed more skepticism than curiosity. Instead of asking a few routine questions and allowing the situation to unfold naturally, Ethan seemed determined to find a reason that justified the suspicion he had already formed. "Is this vehicle registered to you?" he asked. "Yes, officer," Marcus answered in an even tone. The registration is inside the glove compartment if you would like to see it. Ethan studied the luxury SUV once again before speaking. Stay where you are. Marcus simply nodded. Around them, the ordinary rhythm of the gas station had begun to change. Customers who had been focused on filling their tanks now found themselves stealing cautious glances toward pump number 6. A delivery driver paused before climbing back into his truck. A young couple standing beside an ice freezer lowered their voices as they watched from distance. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could sense that the conversation was becoming more serious than a routine stop. Ethan returned to his patrol vehicle to run the driver's license through the computer system. The screen loaded slowly, forcing him to wait longer than expected. As he tapped impatiently on the steering wheel, Marcus remained exactly where he had been told, his hands resting comfortably in front of him, his expression calm despite the growing attention from strangers. He had spent decades in public life and understood that composure often spoke louder than arguments. Drawing unnecessary attention rarely helped difficult situations. When Ethan stepped out again, his questions became noticeably sharper. "Where are you coming from today?" Marcus answered honestly. "I spent the morning visiting several communities north of here." "Business?" Ethan asked. "Public meetings," Marcus replied with a polite smile. The answer seemed only to deepen the officer's suspicion. "What kind of public meetings?" Marcus considered explaining everything, but before he could finish his sentence, Ethan interrupted him. "Do not leave out any details." The interruption did not change Marcus's expression. Instead, he calmly answered each question one at a time, never raising his voice and never matching the officer's increasingly confrontational tone. Imagine standing there, surrounded by complete strangers, realizing that every word you said was being silently judged before it was fully spoken. Some people would become defensive. Others would argue. Marcus chose patience. He believed respect should not depend on whether respect was returned. Meanwhile, unnoticed by nearly everyone, his cell phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. The screen displayed several missed calls from members of his staff, followed by another incoming call. Marcus glanced briefly toward the pocket, but made no attempt to answer without permission. Ethan noticed the movement immediately. "Leave the phone where it is," he instructed firmly. Marcus nodded once more. "That is fine." Across the parking lot, the cashier named Sarah Mitchell looked more carefully through the front window. There was something strangely familiar about the man standing beside the SUV. She had seen his face somewhere before, perhaps on television, perhaps during an interview after the last election, but the connection remained just beyond her memory. Outside, more customers quietly reached for their phones, not to interfere, but simply to record an encounter that no longer felt ordinary. None of them realized that within only a few minutes, every assumption being made at that gas station would be turned completely upside down. The silence around pump number 6 grew heavier with every passing second. What had started as a simple request for identification had quietly transformed into the center of everyone's attention. Marcus Ellison remained exactly where he stood, his posture relaxed, his breathing steady, and his eyes focused on Officer Ethan Brooks with the same calm respect he had shown from the very beginning. He understood something many people never learned until much later in life. Losing control of your emotions rarely helped you regain control of a situation. Ethan, however, appeared to interpret that calmness very differently. To him, Marcus's measured answers and composed demeanor seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. Instead of recognizing cooperation, he became convinced that the man standing before him was hiding something important. "Step away from the vehicle," Ethan instructed. Marcus complied immediately without hesitation. "Certainly, officer." He took several slow steps backward and waited for the next instruction. Ethan circled the sport utility vehicle, carefully studying every angle before stopping beside the driver's door. "Is there anything inside this vehicle that I should know about?" Marcus answered honestly. "Only personal belongings, work materials, and documents from today's meetings." Ethan looked directly at him. "Do I have your permission to inspect the vehicle?" Marcus paused briefly before answering in the same respectful tone. Officer, I would like to understand why that is necessary. The question was neither argumentative nor confrontational. It was simply the kind of reasonable question any citizen might ask during an unexpected encounter. Yet Ethan's expression hardened. I'm asking the questions. Several customers shifted uneasily. The young father who had been helping his daughter quietly placed the windshield squeegee back into its holder. The little girl looked toward Marcus with innocent curiosity, unable to understand why the polite man beside the black vehicle was suddenly surrounded by so much tension. Inside the convenience store, Sarah Mitchell finally remembered where she had seen that familiar face. She walked closer to the front window, narrowing her eyes as Marcus turned slightly beneath the afternoon sunlight. She whispered to herself, "That cannot be." Before she could finish the thought, another customer stepped beside her and asked what was happening outside. Sarah shook her head slowly. "I think I know who that man is, but it does not make any sense." Outside, Ethan continued pressing forward. "Place your hands where I can clearly see them." Marcus immediately raised both hands to chest level, keeping his movements slow and visible. "Like this. Do not move unless I tell you." "Understood." Once again, Marcus offered complete cooperation. His phone vibrated inside his jacket for the fourth time. The screen remained unseen, but the incoming calls continued, arriving one after another. They were coming from people who had expected the governor to arrive at the next event nearly 20 minutes earlier. Staff members, state officials, and members of his security detail were beginning to realize that something unusual had interrupted his schedule. Nearly 15 miles away, inside the State Operations Center, an assistant noticed that Marcus had stopped responding entirely. She checked the vehicle's approved travel route and exchanged concerned looks with another staff member. "He always answers," she said quietly. "Something is wrong." At that exact moment, a decision was made that would soon send multiple state police units toward the last confirmed location of the governor's vehicle. Back at the gas station, nobody knew those calls had already set something much larger into motion. Ethan certainly did not. He remained convinced that he was in complete control of the situation, unaware that with every passing minute, the truth was moving rapidly toward him from the opposite direction. Sarah Mitchell pushed open the convenience store door, the small bell above it chiming softly as she stepped outside. She kept her eyes fixed on Marcus, searching his face one more time. She had watched enough local news over the past few years to recognize familiar public figures, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Still, doubt held her back. Why would the governor be standing alone at an ordinary gas station without an obvious security detail? Why would he allow this encounter to continue without saying who he was? She stopped several feet away, uncertain whether to speak. Marcus briefly noticed her, but offered nothing more than a polite nod before returning his attention to Officer Ethan Brooks. Ethan had already made another decision. "Turn around," he instructed firmly. Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had maintained since the first question. "Officer, may I ask if I am being detained?" "I said turn around." Marcus paused for only a moment before quietly answering, "I am complying." He slowly turned as instructed, never raising his voice or showing frustration. Several customers exchanged uneasy looks. Even those who knew very little about police procedures could sense that the situation had become unusually tense considering how cooperative Marcus had been from the very beginning. The young father instinctively stepped closer to his daughter, while the delivery driver folded his arms and continued watching in silence. No one wanted to interfere, yet no one felt comfortable walking away. Ethan spoke into his shoulder radio, requesting another unit to assist. His voice remained controlled, but there was a confidence in his tone that suggested he believed his suspicions were fully justified. Marcus listened quietly, realizing the encounter was moving beyond a simple misunderstanding. Even then, he made no effort to reveal his office. Throughout his years in public service, he had often reminded young leaders that true character revealed itself when no one believed you held power. Today, those words were quietly becoming reality. His phone vibrated again, then once more. The repeated calls stopped only when a new series of urgent text messages began appearing on the screen inside his pocket. Ethan noticed the movement beneath the jacket. "I already told you to leave the phone alone." "Understand," Marcus answered. "I have not touched it." Sarah finally gathered enough confidence to step closer. "Officer," she said cautiously, "I think—" Ethan raised a hand before she could finish. "Ma'am, please remain behind the marked area." His words were polite, but final. Sarah stepped back without arguing, though the uncertainty on her face only grew stronger. She quietly opened a news application on her own phone and searched for the governor's name. The official photograph appeared almost instantly. She looked at the image, then back toward Marcus, standing beside the black sport utility vehicle. Her heartbeat quickened. The same eyes, the same smile, the same calm presence. She whispered almost inaudibly, "It really is him." Before she could decide what to do next, another customer noticed her expression. "What is it?" he asked softly. Sarah showed him the photograph without saying a word. His eyes widened in disbelief. Within moments, the image began passing discreetly from one phone to another among the growing crowd. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody rushed forward. Instead, quiet whispers replaced casual conversations as realization slowly spread across the parking lot. Yet the one person who needed that information most remained completely unaware. Ethan continued following the path he had chosen minutes earlier, convinced that experience and instinct had already given him the right answer. Far beyond the gas station, several dark state police vehicles accelerated down the highway with emergency authorization, closing the distance mile after mile. At the center of the parking lot, Marcus remained remarkably composed, knowing that truth often required patience, and that patience was about to be tested for only a few minutes longer. The atmosphere at the gas station had changed completely. What had begun as ordinary curiosity had turned into quiet anticipation, as though everyone present could sense that the next few minutes would determine far more than anyone had expected. Nobody returned to pumping gas. Nobody hurried back onto the highway. Conversations had been replaced by whispers, and nearly every phone remained pointed toward the unfolding encounter. Marcus Ellison stood exactly where Officer Ethan Brooks had instructed him to remain. His hands stayed visible, his shoulders relaxed, and his expression remained composed despite the growing tension surrounding him. There was no sign of anger, no attempt to challenge the officer's authority, and no effort to remind anyone of the office he held. Instead, he chose the same principle that had guided him throughout his years in public service. Respect should never depend upon recognition. Ethan interpreted that silence as confirmation that he was making the correct decisions. He believed he was preventing a potential problem before it became something larger. Yet with every instruction he gave, he unknowingly moved one step closer to a moment that would be remembered long after the afternoon ended. Sarah Mitchell looked down at the news photograph on her phone once, again before gathering the courage to speak. This time she did not approach the officer. Instead, she quietly stepped toward Marcus and asked in a careful voice, "Sir, are you Governor Ellison?" Marcus met her eyes for only a brief moment. A gentle smile crossed his face, but he did not answer the question directly. "Right now," he replied softly, "I'm simply cooperating with a police officer." Sarah felt a chill run through her arms. That response confirmed everything she needed to know. She stepped backward, placing one hand over her mouth as disbelief spread across her face. Several people nearby immediately understood her reaction without hearing a single word. The whispers grew louder. "Did she just say, Governor? Is that really him?" "There is no way." Ethan turned toward the crowd, noticing the sudden change in their behavior. "Please stay back," he instructed. "Give us some space." His attention returned to Marcus, still unaware that nearly everyone else had begun putting the pieces together. More phones appeared. Some customers quietly searched online. Others compared the governor's official photograph with the man standing beside the black sport utility vehicle. One by one, uncertainty disappeared. Across the state, inside the governor's office, concern had escalated into action. The last confirmed location of Marcus's vehicle had already been shared with the State Police Command Center. Colonel David Walker, the commanding officer responsible for executive protection coordination, listened carefully as dispatch explained that the governor's phone had stopped responding during a scheduled trip. Within seconds, he ordered multiple state police units to proceed immediately to the reported location. Their vehicles moved quickly but professionally, closing the distance with every mile. Back at the gas station, the first faint sound of distant sirens blended with the steady flow of highway traffic. Most people barely noticed it. Ethan certainly did not. He remained focused on the encounter directly in front of him, convinced that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. Marcus heard the sound almost immediately. His eyes shifted briefly toward the highway before returning to Ethan. He said nothing. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no sign that he expected anyone to rescue him. He simply understood that truth has a remarkable habit of arriving on its own schedule. The afternoon breeze carried the distant sirens a little closer. A few customers turned their heads toward the road, wondering why several emergency vehicles appeared to be approaching the station together. None of them could yet see the distinctive dark patrol vehicles moving rapidly beyond the next curve. But within only a matter of moments, the quiet assumptions that had shaped this entire encounter were about to collide with reality in a way no one standing at pump number 6 would ever forget. The distant sirens grew louder with every passing second until they became impossible to ignore. Heads turned almost in unison toward the entrance of the gas station. A pair of dark state police sport utility vehicles appeared first, followed by 2 marked patrol units traveling in a disciplined formation. They entered the parking lot without unnecessary urgency, their emergency lights reflecting across the windows of parked cars and the polished surface of the fuel pumps. The entire station fell silent. Even the conversations that had continued in hushed whispers disappeared completely. Officer Ethan Brooks glanced toward the arriving vehicles with visible surprise. He had requested assistance, but not from the state police. For a brief moment, he assumed they had simply been the closest available units. Confident in his decisions, he straightened his posture and prepared to brief the arriving officers. Marcus Ellison remained exactly where he stood. His expression did not change. He neither smiled nor looked relieved. He simply watched as the convoy came to a controlled stop only a short distance away. The lead vehicle's door opened first. Colonel David Walker stepped out wearing the unmistakable uniform of the State Police Command staff. His calm but purposeful stride immediately caught the attention of every officer present. Ethan recognized the rank instantly and instinctively stood a little straighter. High-ranking command officers did not normally appear at ordinary roadside encounters. Something about the situation suddenly felt very different. Colonel Walker surveyed the parking lot with a single measured glance before his eyes settled on Marcus. The moment he recognized him, his expression changed from professional concern to unmistakable alarm. Without hesitation, he walked directly past Ethan, closing the distance with quick but controlled steps. Every customer watched in complete silence. Sarah Mitchell held her breath. The delivery driver lowered his phone without realizing it. Even a young child who had been asking questions moments earlier became perfectly still. Colonel Walker stopped in front of Marcus and spoke with quiet respect that carried clearly across the motionless parking lot. "Governor Ellison, are you all right, sir?" Time seemed to stop. The words echoed through the station more powerfully than any siren. Several people closed their eyes for a moment, realizing their suspicions had been true all along. Others stared at Ethan, waiting to see his reaction. Marcus answered calmly, "I'm fine, Colonel. Thank you for coming." Only then did Colonel Walker notice the full situation surrounding the governor. His eyes moved carefully across the scene before returning to Ethan. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only a long moment of silence that seemed far heavier than any raised voice could have been. Ethan's confidence disappeared almost instantly. His eyes shifted from Marcus to the colonel, and then back again, as though hoping he had somehow misunderstood what he had just witnessed. "Governor," he repeated quietly, almost to himself, Marcus finally met Ethan's eyes with the same calm expression he had maintained since the beginning of their encounter. There was no anger in his face, no satisfaction, and no desire to embarrass the officer standing before him. "Yes," Marcus answered gently. "My name is Marcus Ellison." Around them, every assumption made over the previous 20 minutes collapsed at once. The customers who had quietly recorded the encounter now understood why Marcus had remained so composed. Sarah slowly lowered her phone, realizing she had just witnessed an extraordinary lesson in dignity. Colonel Walker turned toward the arriving state police personnel and gave several calm instructions. They immediately began securing the area, speaking respectfully with witnesses and ensuring everyone remained safe and comfortable. No one rushed. No one raised a voice. The professionalism of the arriving officers transformed the atmosphere almost instantly. Standing in the middle of the gas station, Ethan realized that the encounter he believed he understood had become something entirely different, and the consequences of the choices made during those ordinary afternoon minutes were only beginning to unfold. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds came from idling engines, the steady hum of the fuel pumps, and a light breeze moving across the parking lot. Colonel David Walker stood beside Governor Marcus Ellison, his posture composed but unmistakably protective. Behind him, the arriving state police officers spread out calmly, greeting local witnesses, preserving the scene, and quietly assessing everything that had taken place before their arrival. The contrast between the first encounter and the atmosphere now unfolding could not have been more striking. Marcus remained exactly as he had been from the beginning. His shoulders were relaxed, his voice steady, and his attention focused not on humiliation or revenge, but on restoring calm. Officer Ethan Brooks stood motionless, replaying every decision he had made over the past 20 minutes. The questions, the assumptions, the conclusions he had reached before fully understanding the situation. They returned one after another with painful clarity. Colonel Walker finally addressed him in a calm, measured voice. "Officer Brooks, I would appreciate a brief explanation of what led to this encounter." Ethan swallowed before answering. "Sir, I believed I was investigating suspicious circumstances." Colonel Walker nodded slightly. "And what specific facts led you to that conclusion?" Ethan hesitated. For the first time since arriving at the gas station, he struggled to organize his thoughts. Several answers entered his mind, but none sounded as convincing now as they had only minutes earlier. Before he could continue, Marcus spoke gently. "Colonel, the officer has already explained his concerns. I have cooperated throughout our conversation." Walker looked toward the governor with quiet respect. "Yes, sir. We appreciate your patience." Marcus gave a small nod. Every public servant deserves the opportunity to explain their decisions fairly. Those words surprised nearly everyone listening. Several witnesses expected anger. Others expected demands for immediate punishment. Instead, they heard restraint. They heard dignity. Sarah Mitchell felt herself growing emotional as she watched the exchange. She realized that the man who had been questioned throughout the afternoon was now the calmest person in the entire parking lot. The delivery driver standing nearby quietly lowered his phone and whispered to another customer, "That is real leadership." Meanwhile, another state police supervisor approached Colonel Walker and quietly informed him that multiple customers had voluntarily recorded the encounter from different angles. Walker acknowledged the information with a brief nod. "Please ensure every recording is preserved through the proper process. We will review the complete sequence." His instructions remained professional, never emotional. Marcus listened without interruption. He understood that accountability carried far greater meaning when it followed established procedures rather than personal frustration. Ethan slowly looked toward Marcus. His voice was noticeably quieter than before. "Governor, I did not know who you were." Marcus answered without hesitation. "Officer, today was never about whether you recognized me." Ethan looked down at the pavement. Marcus continued in the same calm tone. "Every person you meet deserves the same respect, whether they're a governor, a teacher, a truck driver, or someone simply stopping for gasoline on their way home." The words settled over the crowd with remarkable weight. No lecture could have been clearer. No raised voice could have carried greater impact. Colonel Walker watched the exchange carefully before speaking once more. Governor Ellison, your security team is ready whenever you wish to depart. Marcus glanced around the parking lot, meeting the eyes of several witnesses who had silently observed everything from beginning to end. He offered each of them a polite nod before turning back toward Walker. In a moment, Colonel. He then faced Ethan one final time. I hope today's lesson stays with both of us. Public trust is built one encounter at a time, and every encounter begins before anyone knows the name of the person standing in front of them. No one in the parking lot moved. The afternoon sun continued drifting lower across the horizon, but the atmosphere had changed forever. The authority everyone noticed at first had come from a uniform. The authority everyone remembered in the end came from character. Ironically, the moment that could have become the most humiliating for everyone involved became the moment that revealed the true meaning of public service. Governor Marcus Ellison did not ask for special treatment. He did not demand apologies in front of the crowd, nor did he allow emotion to replace judgment. Instead, he turned toward Colonel David Walker and spoke with the same calm confidence that had defined every minute of the afternoon. Colonel, I want every witness to know that this situation will be handled exactly as every other official matter should be handled. Preserve every piece of evidence. Speak with every person who was present. Review every recording from beginning to end. Facts deserve to speak louder than assumptions. Walker nodded immediately. Yes, Governor. The state police officers quietly began documenting the scene with remarkable professionalism. Witnesses were respectfully invited to provide statements if they wished. Sarah Mitchell voluntarily shared the timeline she had observed from inside the convenience store. The delivery driver offered the video he had recorded from the beginning of the encounter. The young father quietly explained how Marcus had remained cooperative from the very first conversation until the arrival of the state police. None of the witnesses described shouting, resistance, or confrontation. Instead, nearly every statement repeated the same. Observation. The governor had remained patient even while facing growing suspicion. Officer Ethan Brooks listened to every conversation without interrupting. Each statement seemed to remove another layer of certainty that had existed only minutes before. He finally understood that the most important details had never been hidden. They had simply been overlooked. Marcus walked a few steps toward Ethan before speaking once more. His voice remained steady enough that everyone nearby could hear. Officer Brooks, accountability is not meant to destroy people. It exists to improve the trust people place in public institutions. Ethan slowly raised his eyes. Governor, I understand. Marcus gave a slight nod. Then learn from today. Every encounter offers two opportunities. One to enforce the law, and another to strengthen public confidence. The second is often more difficult. Those words remained with everyone standing in the parking lot. Sarah quietly wiped away a tear she had not realized was forming. She thought back to the first moments of the encounter when she had almost ignored the feeling that something was wrong. The delivery driver shook his head slowly. I will remember this conversation for the rest of my life, he whispered. Colonel Walker approached Marcus once again. Governor, your schedule for the remainder of the afternoon has already been adjusted. The next meeting has been postponed. Marcus smiled gently. Good. The people waiting there deserve my full attention, not a distracted conversation. Even after everything that had happened, his first concern remained the citizens he had planned to visit. That simple response quietly impressed everyone within earshot. Before leaving, Marcus looked once more across the gas station. His eyes met those of the customers who had witnessed the entire afternoon unfold. Thank you for remaining respectful, he said warmly. Communities become stronger when ordinary people choose honesty over assumptions. Several people nodded in return. Some smiled quietly. Others simply watched in thoughtful silence. As Marcus walked toward the waiting state police vehicle, Ethan remained standing near his patrol car, reflecting on an afternoon that had begun with confidence and ended with humility. The lesson was no longer about one officer or one governor. It had become something much larger. Every person at that gas station had witnessed how quickly assumptions could shape decisions, and how patiently truth could restore perspective. Sometimes justice does not arrive through dramatic speeches or loud confrontations. Sometimes it arrives through professionalism, integrity, and the courage to let the facts tell the entire story as the last rays of sunlight settled across the parking lot. The gas station slowly returned to the ordinary rhythm it had known only an hour before. Families resumed their trips, truck drivers climbed back into their cabs, and customers quietly carried coffee cups toward waiting vehicles. Yet no one left exactly the same person they had been when they arrived. They carried home something far more valuable than an unexpected story. They carried a lesson they had witnessed with their own eyes. Governor Marcus Ellison thanked Colonel David Walker and the state police officers for their professionalism before stepping toward his own vehicle. One member of his security team opened the driver's door, but Marcus smiled politely and shook his head. "I can manage from here," he said warmly. The officer returned the smile with a respectful nod. Even after everything that had happened, Marcus preferred the same quiet independence that had brought him there in the first place. Before entering the vehicle, he turned once more toward the small crowd that remained. Several people waved. Sarah Mitchell thanked him for showing patience during such a difficult afternoon. Marcus answered with the same humility that had guided every conversation throughout the day. "Thank you for caring enough to pay attention." Communities become stronger when ordinary people choose fairness before judgment. Those simple words stayed with Sarah long after the governor drove away. Officer Ethan Brooks remained beside his patrol vehicle, watching the black sport utility vehicle disappear onto the highway. The parking lot suddenly felt much quieter than before. Colonel Walker approached him one final time. His voice remained professional and measured. "Officer Brooks, the review process will follow established policy. Cooperate fully, provide a complete statement, and allow the facts to speak for themselves." Ethan nodded slowly. "I will, Colonel." Walker gave a respectful nod before returning to his own vehicle. No celebration followed. No public humiliation took place. There was only accountability, handled with the same dignity that Marcus had requested from the very beginning. Over the following days, the recordings collected from witnesses, the surveillance footage from the gas station, and every official report were reviewed through the appropriate procedures. The incident became an important reminder throughout the department that professionalism begins long before identities are confirmed. Training sessions were updated to reinforce impartial decision-making, respectful communication, and the responsibility carried by every public servant during even the most routine encounters. Marcus never spoke publicly about personal frustration. Instead, during a community leadership event several weeks later, he shared a simple reflection without mentioning names or locations. Character is revealed when we meet someone who appears to have nothing we need and no influence to offer. That is the moment we discover whether we truly believe every person deserves equal dignity. The audience responded with thoughtful silence before rising to their feet in appreciation. Somewhere else, Officer Ethan listened to that speech after it was posted online. He watched the entire recording without skipping a single word. For the first time, he understood that the most significant mistake made that afternoon had not been procedural. It had been allowing assumptions to arrive before understanding. Imagine standing before a complete stranger with the power to shape the next few minutes of that person's life. Now imagine discovering afterward that the greatest judgment made that day was never about status, position, or authority. It was about character, because badges represent responsibility, not superiority. Titles deserve respect, but humanity deserves it first. And the strongest measure of justice will never be how we treat the powerful after we recognize them. It will always be how we treat the stranger whose name we do not yet know.